Okay, we're back from our break, and we're going to run through a bunch of quick little laws, but you all may have some comments to make about them. We'll see what you think of these. Okay, we're here about those who coin adulterine money. Okay, we inflict capital punishment on and confiscate the property of those who coin adulterine money or who knowingly receive it and use it. We also inflict this penalty on those who conspire with them. Okay, what he's doing is keeping control of the coinage here and who is coining money, and he appears to be reserving the coining of money to the state. This was done in England from Anglo-Saxon times. That was an Anglo-Saxon custom that only the king could coin money, and this takes the right of coining money away from the individual cities who had it in Sicily before this time. Yeah, comment.
Did you skip the section about forgers, or did I miss it?
Did I miss the forgers? Okay. Yes, I skipped it. Thank you. Okay, let's go back one more thing to forgers. Anyone who either alters royal letters or seals them with a spurious seal should suffer capital punishment. Okay, that's about forgers. They are anyone who forges. Just forgery is illegal. And death is the punishment. Okay. Now, again, regulating the coinage, about the shaving of money. We punish those who shave gold or silver coins or diminish them in any way capitally, and we confiscate all their goods. Okay. They die. Death is if you shave the money, that would be like shaving the coin. It diminishes the value of the coin, and if you shave enough of them, you gather up some gold and silver. It's the same as stealing, yeah.
It's really important to have confidence in the money because this trade is such an important part of Sicily's economy.
Right, it is. It's very important, and so the king is trying to get control of the money and to regulate the money and make it trustworthy. Yeah.
Though they no longer made of silver, American dimes and quarters and halves, and are still made with milled edges like they used to be when they were silver, so that you could tell whether or not they had been shaved. If they were shaved, you would notice, but the milled edge like that with a whole bunch of little grooves was intended to prevent that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, but this was always a problem in ancient times. People would shave the money, so it's happening in Sicily, and he's trying to control the coinage. Okay, whoever uses a forged document unwittingly is not held by the crime of forgery. So that if you do the forgery, you die. But if you unwittingly, if you don't know it's forged and you use it, then you're not considered a forger. Okay, about the falsehood of a person who produces witnesses. Whoever furnishes a falsehood with witnesses should be corrected by the penalty for forgery. Okay, so that's if you get a witness to lie, you die. That's what it is. So he's regulating the courts, and he's regulating testimony in the courts.
And it seems like intention is being taken into account here. I mean, if you don't intentionally do something, then he recognizes that. It would be difficult, though, to find out whether someone intentionally or unintentionally did forgery.
Yeah, that would be more difficult. How do you deter? Well, I guess you get witnesses and hope that they don't lie. Okay. About those who conceal wills. The person who destroys, conceals, or alters public wills should be held by the same penalty. Okay, that means it's the next law in the series. If you destroy or alter a will, that's the same as forgery, and the penalty is death. Okay, this is a whole series of laws. And remember that if he passes a law against something, people are doing it. That means we've got forgers forging things. We've got people shaving money. We've got people altering wills. And so he's trying to bring law and order. He's a law and order king. Okay. About the destruction of a father's will. If anyone destroys his father's will in order that he may inherit as if his father had died intestate, he should be deprived of his father's inheritance. The rank of a person increases and diminishes the penalty for forgery. Now that's an interesting one. Let me turn the page there. Yeah, question.
Wills were often held by the church in safekeeping. This was also a regulation to make sure that the church behaved itself.
Well, I think, yeah, that may be it. And certainly in England, churchmen were guilty of forgery, but they didn't forge wills for money. They tended in England more to forge documents to get their rights. But forgery is a real problem that's going on everywhere. But this law about if anyone destroys his father's will it's about a son who destroys his own father's will. Okay, about judgments. The rank of a person increases and diminishes the penalty for forgery. Okay, I guess if a poor person, if a person of low rank commits a crime, he has a lesser punishment than someone of higher rank, or it could be the opposite. It doesn't specify here which one gets punished more, the person of low rank or the person of high rank. Okay, about poisoners. Whoever gives, sells, or possesses evil and harmful medicines or poisons that cause death should suffer capital punishment. Okay. Poor Mabel, yes. About the correction of those who dispense love potions. Whoever prepares a love potion or some harmful food will not go unpunished, even if he harms no one. Okay. Well, it's magic. You know, the church would be against that kind of magic. Yeah, comment.
So the statement also recognizes that they don't actually work, but still you shouldn't do it.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, that's true. Yeah, he recognizes it doesn't work. All right. Now, let's see. We've got a couple more here. Here's one about adulteries and about procuring. The harshness of the laws has been softened. The penalty against adulterers who attack the wives of others must no longer be the sword. Rather, we introduce the penalty of confiscation of their property if they have no legitimate children from the violated marriage or another. For it is most unjust that children should be defrauded of their inheritance if they were born at a time when the law of marriage was legally preserved. But a woman must not be handed over to her husband, who would rage against her until he killed her. Instead, the slitting of her nose, which is more severely and more cruelly introduced, should pursue the vengeance of the violated marriage. But if her husband is unwilling to give her a punishment, we will not allow such a crime to go unpunished, but will order her to be publicly flogged. This is kind of a mixed law. Okay, he's softening the laws, whereas apparently adulterers were punished with death, but no longer are they to be put to the sword. I suspect this is a Muslim law, that adulterers are punished with death, and so he's trying to stoning. Yeah, well, he says put to the sword here, so that doesn't suggest. But what he's trying to do is to protect the inheritance of children, and then introduce lesser punishments. The slitting of her nose, that doesn't sound nice, but I guess it's better than dying. Yeah, comment.
It seems that it was only considered adultery if the women did it. What about wandering husbands?
This reads only women. It doesn't read. Okay.
But not the impression I got from listening to that.
Perhaps it could mean both men and women.
Sounds like.
Yeah.
It sounds like what they were saying was.
The husband chooses not to punish her, will flog her. But nothing about it. The wife chooses.
Oh, okay. Okay, but listen to the middle part here. He says, but the children should not lose their inheritance. So that suggests that men are included in this law. But then, but a woman must not be handed over to her husband who would rage against her until he killed her. Okay, so the husband cannot kill a wife for adultery. Yeah.
In Muslim law, of course, both are punished.
Yeah. And this seems to read for both of them, but the husband is allowed to slit her nose, which is more severely and more cruelly introduced, should pursue the vengeance of the violated marriage. That reads it's a little bit difficult to understand if he's permitting that. Yeah.
On the business of not depriving the children of the inheritance, it means that the husband who commits adultery is not going to be outlawed, because if it was, his children would lose their right of inheritance. So he may be put to death, but he is not. But his children are not attainted with it, so they can still inherit it.
Okay. This is not what it says. They're not outlawing the husband. They're saying that the penalty against adulterers who attack the wives of others must no longer be the sword. Rather, we will confiscate their property if they have no legitimate children.
This sounds like it's a punishment for the men that are sleeping with married women. It sounds like men who attack the wives of others. I think what it's saying is a man who sleeps with a married woman is no longer going to be killed, but his property would be confiscated, unless, of course, he had children.
No, and the attacking is when the husband is angry and
No, this is both. I mean, yeah.
Well, from what it sounds like, reading from what you just said, they don't kill him, but if he has children by that woman, they won't take his property away. But if he doesn't have any children, they will take his property away.
Now that puts a different light on it. Let me read it again. The harshness of the laws has been softened. The penalty against adulterers who attack the wives of others must no longer be the sword. Rather, we introduce the penalty of confiscation of their property if they have no legitimate children from the violated marriage or another. Okay. The violated marriage is their own marriage as well as the marriage of others. And so death is not the penalty for adultery, but confiscation of property unless they have children, and then they're not confiscating the property. This is not a very harsh penalty. I mean, he's really taking it away, and he's also saying that that husbands can't kill their wives for adultery. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, the slitting of the nose, as suggested, is actually a Greek punishment, as it was inflicted very often on Byzantine rulers who they didn't want to be emperor anymore.
Well, in the case of Byzantine rulers, you may be right that it may be a Greek custom, but in the case of Byzantine rulers, they actually cut off their noses because you can't be emperor without a nose. For some reason, there actually was one emperor who had a silver nose made for himself and seized the throne back. Well, but that's beside the point. Okay, how about another penalty for adultery? Whoever allows his wife to be wanton with debauched men while he or another looks on cannot easily accuse her in court. Obviously, whoever conspires when he can forbid opens the way for fraud. Okay. This is an adventurous society. Okay. About the prohibition of lasciviousness in women. Although someone may have a suspect wife, still if she has faith in him, we do not condemn him for pimping. For who disturbs by right the peace of another man's marriage? But if we learn clearly that he has a lascivious wife, it follows that she should be condemned to a worthy penalty. Also we condemn him by the penalty of infamy. It's a little bit confusing. Although someone may have a suspect wife, still, if she has faith in him, we do not condemn him for pimping. That's not very clear. For who disturbs by right the peace of another man's marriage? It seems to be saying that a husband can set his wife to prostitution, that he's allowed to do that. But if she does it herself, that without her husband's permission, then she should be condemned for it. Okay, if her husband sells her as a prostitute, then he can do it. That's what it says. Yeah.
I heard it as if just because people are talking about her, just because she is suspect, but if she still has faith in him, as in she's still remaining faithful to him, then she won't be punished just because people are talking about her.
Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. Okay, that someone suspects that she's committing adultery. For who disturbs by right the peace of another man's marriage? Oh, I think you're right. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It says prohibition of lasciviousness in women. It's not
right.
clear.
Well, the second part prohibits lasciviousness in women. Okay. All right. Let's see if we have just one more set of laws here.
In other words, a suspicion is not enough to justify a condemnation for being lascivious.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, that's the way that law should read.
That would definitely work in favor of the wife, because if her husband was trying to put her aside for being wanton, as they like to call it, then he has to have some sort of proof or evidence, rather than just everybody knows that she's...
Rather than rumor. Yeah, okay. I think you're right about that. And then if we read it that way, that protects the rights of women again.
The next law says lascivious women must be removed from association with good.
Yeah, okay, let me read you the next law. A woman who has exhibited her body for sale far and wide cannot be accused of adultery. But we prohibit violence to be done to her, and we forbid her to dwell among women of good reputation. Sounds like he is legalizing prostitution. Yeah.
Or it may already be there that he's recognizing.
It may be already there and he's recognizing it. Okay.
I have to wonder if she didn't exhibit it for sale far and wide in just, one town. Was it acceptable?
She should advertise that she is.
But we prohibit violence to be done to her, but we forbid her to dwell among women of good reputation. So it sounds like he's legalizing prostitution.
Maybe this is a Phoenician Carthaginian.
Okay, how divorces should be granted. Divorce must always be permitted in this accusation, and no violence or detention should be employed. Okay. So divorce is permitted. About madams. By the present law, we order that madams, i.e. those who solicit the chastity of another, which is the worst kind of crime, should be punished like adulteresses. These laws almost sound contradictory. I mean, they're a little bit contradicting here.
Not necessarily.
The madams shouldn't be in the business. The women can do it directly.
The women can do it, but the madams can't profit from it. No, that may be
You're
what
saying
they're saying.
if madams try to, can you read the exact phrasing again?
Those who solicit the chastity of another.
If the woman's
Already not chaste, if she's already
not a virgin and not, living, exactly a moral life,
So
she's
seducing women into prostitution.
women who are seducing good women into.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, here's about mothers who prostitute their daughters. We prosecute mothers who prostitute their virginal daughters and who flee the bonds of marriage like madams, and we order that their noses should be slit. For it is cruel and inhuman for them to sell the chastity of their own offspring. But if a daughter prostitutes herself and the mother only consents, she is left to the decision of the judge. Okay, but obviously lots of prostitution is going on because he feels he has to regulate it, just like he regulated the coinage. Okay, about the penalty for a wife caught in the act of adultery. If a husband catches his wife in the very act of adultery, he may kill both the adulterer and his wife, but without any further delay. Okay, he can't stop to think about it.
Can't get after the fact.
He can't do it after the fact. He has to do it right there at the moment, and if he doesn't do it then, he can't do it later. All right.
Unless he catches her.
Unless he catches her again. Yeah, okay. About the penalty for a husband when the adulterer escapes. The penalty for pimping binds a husband who has captured his wife who was caught in the act of adultery and has lost the adulterer unless the latter escaped through no fault of his own. I'm not sure I understand that. The penalty for pimping binds a husband who has captured his wife who was caught in the act of adultery and has lost the adulterer unless the latter escaped through no fault of his. Okay, if the husband captures his wife in the act of adultery and the adulterer escapes, then the husband is to be punished like a pimp, as if he were a pimp, unless the man, the adulterer man, has escaped through no fault of the husband. That's how I see that.
In other words, you're to punish the husband who doesn't take action against someone who commits adultery with his wife.
Exactly. That's exactly what it says. Okay. All right, just a few more. Okay, about the sale of a free man. Whoever knowingly sells a free man should be held by this legitimate penalty. The person sold should be redeemed, if possible, from his goods. But the criminal should be made a slave of the court, and the rest of his goods should be confiscated. If the man who has been sold cannot be redeemed, his seller should be handed over as a slave to the parents of the one who was sold, and his goods should be awarded to the court. However, in any case where the person who was sold returns, the criminal should become the slave of the court, and his sons born after this case should be subject to perpetual slavery at the court. But this is a law that regulates slavery, and what it tells us is he's permitting slavery in Sicily. Now, slavery goes back to Muslim tradition, and Muslim tradition permitted slavery, and so he's keeping that tradition of slavery, and so he's mixing. We can see how he's mixing and matching these cultures here. Okay, about arsonists. Whoever sets a house on fire by deceit should suffer the penalty of death like arsonists. Whoever kills a man by throwing a club or hurling himself down from above. Whoever hurls himself down from above and kills a man, and whoever throws a club without caution or throws a rock and does not announce it and kills a man should submit to capital punishment. Okay, there's a specific kind of murder here that's being punished. Okay, well, these laws, okay, that's the end of the laws, all right. And I will put this list on the website for you all so that you can go back and look at these. But he's bringing law and order to the kingdom with laws that are to be applied to the whole kingdom. It's very interesting what he's trying to do. Okay, Roger took an intense personal interest in administration and finance, and he really did a hands-on administration. He was a very smart man, and he thought a lot about how the kingdom should be run. But his son, William I, gave his chancellor, Mayo of Bari, a free hand, and Mayo of Bari, of course, would have had more time to devote himself just to the administration, and so he was the one who really constructed a more structured administration. And we see developments in administration. Chamberlains in Apulia and Campania were made subject to the master chamberlain, and we see the growth of a class of civil servants that are distinct from aristocratic society. The civil servants have specific role, they give written reports, and they actually have a salary from the state. And we might just mention that there's something parallel, not exactly parallel, but similar going on in England under Henry I, where he is building a class of bureaucrats who owe their careers to the king. And so we see a bureaucratic administration being built in both of the major kingdoms. Norman rulers succeeded in constructing a national church closely tied to the monarchy, and we've seen how they've done that, winning their independence from the Pope, and really the kings set themselves up as the heads of the church. There's royal influence over the episcopal elections, and by the time of William I, there are a total of 145 bishops in the whole kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Roger reorganized the church. He set up archbishops in Palermo and Messina, with bishops in Catania and Lipari Patti, Cefalù, and Bagnero. And obviously these are the first bishops in Sicily, because under the Muslims there were no bishops. There were no archbishops, there were no bishops. He set up the whole structure of the church himself. He also founded monasteries. In Cava was the most important one, with priories all over Mezzogiorno, and this would have been a Latin abbey, but it's kind of unique. Cava is Latin, but most of the monasteries in Sicily were in fact Greek, like Holy Savior, which also had many priories. There were 18 major Greek abbeys in Sicily and 13 lesser Greek abbeys, 4 of each of the major and lesser abbeys in Calabria. And so royal patronage of these abbeys helped to control the countryside, because the abbots and the monks would have so much influence over the countryside. Then he used the church to increase royal control, essentially. And so we see here the Greek abbeys largely spreading all over Sicily, and some on the coast in Calabria as well. Again, Calabria is very tied into Sicily, and the rest of all of this had Latin monasteries. And I didn't bring all the evidence for this, but as I read Orderic Vitalis, the Abbey of Saint Evroul sent monks continually to Italy. They first had the Abbey of Saint Euphemia, which had a lot of daughter houses, all ruled by monks of Saint Evroul. And so you have a little network of Saint Evroul monks in the area of Italy. Saint Euphemia is actually down here, near, just south of Cosenza, and it had daughter houses all over the rest of this area. Well, Roger died on the 26th or the 27th of February in 1154 and wanted to be buried in Cefalù. And we've already seen Cefalù. I'm sorry I didn't do another picture of Cefalù, but at the very same time that Cefalù was built with its magnificent Christ Pantocrator, which I showed you last time, George of Antioch built the Martorana for Greek nuns, and also around the same time as Capella Palatina, about 1143. William I had already been co-ruler for 3 years, and after Roger's death he was crowned at Palermo at Easter. William inherited a full treasury, an efficient administration, but also problems with Frederick Barbarossa, the German emperor, aiming to make war against him and capture Sicily. And Pope Adrian IV, who was the only English pope, by the way, refused William's delegation, and Adrian IV considered William's inheritance illegal. He was also threatened by the Byzantine Emperor Manuel Comnenus, who aspired to conquer Sicily. So William I inherited a full treasury and a very prosperous and well-ordered kingdom, but also lots of enemies. Okay, here is the tomb of Roger I. You actually have a better picture of it in your book. I'm going to zoom in on it. I took it from both angles, actually. It's in the back here, and you can see this very Norman structure of the tomb. Zoom out a little bit, and you can see the roof over it. his famous tomb. I took it from that angle, and I couldn't walk back there because it was cordoned off. But there we can see his tomb with this very Norman style of canopy over it. It looks very Norman. This is Henry VI. But this is in back, and there's a cordon, so I couldn't walk back there and take it. This is, the Church of the Martorana is back here, and in front of it is another church, and this is an older church that goes back to the very earliest time of the Normans being there, maybe one of the first churches that was built there. Look how Muslim it looks with those domes on the top, and actually it was turned into a mosque when Palermo reverted back to the Muslims for a while, and it was actually made into a mosque and then turned back into a church. We couldn't get into that to see the interior. I understand it's very interesting, but it's right next to and behind the Martorana, which is this big church here built by the Emir, the Admiral George, and here is the Martorana. It's a Greek church for nuns. And it's very beautiful. Look at this gorgeous Norman tower on it, and you can see the rest of the church. And the interior, I really apologize. I saved on the disc, I saved my pictures wrong, and so the best ones I couldn't print out for you, but I'll bring them next time. But this church was covered with mosaics like the Cappella Palatina, and my pictures are much better of them. This is the cupola, and it's the tower over the church, over the crossing, which is so familiar to Norman churches. And originally it was completely covered with mosaics, and I'm just going to zoom into the cupola, which has Christ. It's almost a Christ Pantocrator kind of, well, it's not very clear, okay, kind of image in it. That's the best we can get it. Okay. They're magnificent mosaics, again, as all these churches filled with mosaics are. So here you can see the cupola, and here you can see some of the mosaics closer up. We'll zoom back, and so you can see here is one of the domes with the starry sky that's very Byzantine. And of course the Greeks built this, and all the inscriptions are in Greek, the inscriptions that are made. And then we see these two figures. This is St. Paul and this is St. Peter in this particular picture. And you can see the just magnificent mosaics that covered all the walls of this beautiful church. Very, very Greek. And here is another church built at about the same time in Palermo. This is Palermo, and this is San Giovanni. And it's a monastery, so it's much simpler and not as gorgeously decorated. But again, you can see the clear Muslim influence with these domes over it. But then the very plain exterior and not big windows or anything except for the tower, which is extremely Norman in the earliest Norman style. It's not the later decorated Norman style. Here is the entrance going in to that monastery, and again the simplicity of the monastery. This is the garden outside of it, and here is the interior. Walking into the first hall, and it's a very simple monastic kind of architecture, unadorned. Probably it had frescoes all over the walls, and I'll show you one of those frescoes. Here we can look up into one of the domes, and you can see the construction of the dome. This is the dome up here, and here are the supporting structures, arches around it. And here is the interior. This is the nave. It's a very small church, not big and flashy, but very small. the nave. And here is the one remaining fresco, but probably originally it was all covered with frescoes of this kind. Kind of like St. Angelo in Formis. Remember Desiderius's church, which I suggested might well have been a model for all of the Norman churches. And here we see the frescoes on the wall. Here is a wall on the outside as you go into the garden, and that's very Norman in design and character. Here is the cloister, and of course you always have a cloister in a monastery, and the cloister where the monks would gather, and very Norman arches, almost horseshoe arches, and very slim Muslim-style columns. And so again you can see the blending of all the cultures in this monastery. Here's another view of that cloister. Okay. William, when he became king, made alliances with the Venetians and the Hungarians against the Greeks because he was afraid of a combined German-Greek alliance. So he was looking for allies to protect him. In 1155, Frederick Barbarossa invaded Italy, and William led the defense. But many Italians rebelled against William. Remember how rebellious the Italians were anyway. And William then attacked Benevento, the papal territory, but his vassals deserted and the siege was abandoned. But the minute he attacked Benevento, Adrian excommunicated William, and the revolt spread more widely over all of Italy and convulsed mainland Italy. But the German vassals refused to follow Barbarossa into Italy, and so he was crippled with his invasion. But the Greeks and the popes helped the rebels, and so at this point one of these rebel leaders came to the front, and Robert II of Capua did homage to Adrian. And let's just check our map for a minute. What we're talking about, of course, is Frederick Barbarossa from Germany, who claimed northern Italy and was moving down into Rome and moving down into southern Italy. And so this is the rebellious place. Sicily was in fact unaffected by this rebellion. Byzantine troops and Robert of Bassenville, who led the rebels, captured almost all of southern Italy, and William only held Naples, Amalfi, Salerno, Troia, and Melfi. He just held these major cities, and a rebellion then started in Sicily as well, and the Greeks allied themselves with Adrian and the Genoese. At this point, William sent an offer to Adrian to restore the church's freedom to his realm, and he agreed. He offered not to interfere in episcopal elections, and in fact to turn everything over to the Pope in return for lifting the excommunication and papal investiture. He wanted papal recognition of his own legitimacy of succession, and in return he promised to recognize the Pope and to let the Pope control the episcopal elections and to enlarge his domains of Benevento and provide Adrian with military support and money against the communes of Rome who were rebelling. Well, Adrian really wanted to accept this offer, but some of the cardinals objected, and so really against his better judgment, he didn't accept the offer, much to his regret later. And so we can see here the realm of Italy that only a few of the cities here and over here actually a few of the cities remained loyal to William, but all the rest of the countryside had been captured by the Germans. Recovering from his illness, William launched land and sea attacks on Brindisi, and he won a speedy victory and took bloody revenge because Brindisi and Berry and the people of that area of Italy had rebelled against him. He razed Berry to the ground, everything but the Cathedral of St. Nicholas, and all the inhabitants were dispersed or killed. He captured Prince Robert II of Capua and hence Campania. He then then got control of Campania. Robert was blinded and imprisoned in Palermo, and Robert of Bassenville and other rebels were exiled. Now everyone abandoned Adrian, and Adrian had to conclude an agreement under force on 18 June 1156. At this point, William did homage and swore fealty and received investiture with the 3 banners, the same banners that Roger had gotten, the banner for Sicily, the banner for Italy, and I forget what the 3rd banner was for, but for all the lands that he had conquered. Adrian confirmed William's right to arrange the succession as he liked. This meant that the Pope would not choose his successor, and this is a right that is not normally given to a vassal. And so it weakened Adrian very much that he couldn't choose William's successor. William was also confirmed in the full territorial extent of his kingdom, but adding Abruzzi and Marcia. And so looking at our map again, Abruzzi and Marcia are right up in this area, and they're right on the boundary of the papal lands. And so he actually increased the area that he had under his control. Okay. He ceded control, or Adrian ceded control over the church in his kingdom to William, but appeals to Rome were to be allowed in mainland Italy, but not in Sicily. Adrian also ceded control to William over the episcopal elections, and Palermo was to be the seat of a metropolitan archbishop with suffragan bishops in Agrigento, Mazzara, and Malta. And William also made treaties with Genoa and the Greeks, but at this particular time he lost his territories in Africa. So what he had done was to secure his whole domain in Sicily and mainland Italy, but he lost Africa because he was involved in these fights. New papal elections were held in 1159 when Adrian died, and Alexander III and the anti-pope Victor IV were both elected. Frederick Barbarossa, of course, was the one who elected or appointed Victor IV, and Barbarossa newly determined to attack William. William became the principal attacker, on the other hand, of Alexander III. So we see this continuing rivalry between the Pope and the anti-Pope and the Germans and the Italians. Now, I just had to show you this picture. This is a building, and I have no idea what it was, but as we were walking around Palermo, lo and behold, we saw this building. We're walking from St. Giovanni to the Martorana, which had been closed earlier in the day, and just here was this building, and clearly it's Norman. I mean, this is clearly Norman. It comes from the Norman era. It's completely Norman in style. It's been renovated on the bottom floor, but there it is, and who knows what it is, but it's in Palermo. The Normans are still there. Okay, and this is the seal of Frederick Barbarossa. I'll just zoom in on that so you can see what Frederick Barbarossa looked like. It's kind of a portrait of him. Okay, so that's Frederick Barbarossa, one of the strongest of German kings. But in 1160, in a new revolt, Mayo of Berry was murdered and William and his family were taken prisoner. Roger, the heir to the throne, was killed at that point, but William suppressed this rebellion nonetheless. William died suddenly in 1166 at the early age of 45. His widow, Margaret of Navarre, was now the regent, and she yielded to the nobles. Remember, somebody commented here that Roger had wisely kept the counts out of Sicily. Well, Margaret recalled 3 of the exiled counts, the counts of Acera, Abellino, and Loratello. Actually, these counts are all in Italy, and she appointed 8 new ones. And so she had to yield to noble pressure, and she regularly delegated justice to them. she brought in her cousin, Stephen of Perche, and Perche is in Normandy. It's on the border of Normandy. And she made him chancellor and archbishop-elect of Palermo. But then the nobles forced her to exile him so that she was in a relatively weak position. Stephen of Perche was succeeded by Walter, who was William's tutor, and Walter held on for not only through the rest of William's reign, but also his brother became his successor, so he was very important. Okay, here are the laws of King William. In the Liber Augustulus or the Constitutions of Melfi, and there aren't nearly as many of them as there were laws of Roger. King William also added to the law codes, and here are some of his laws. Okay. About the punishment of usurers, we have established that in accordance with the decree of the Lord Pope on usury recently promulgated in the Roman Curia, and there's a decree in 1162 that was passed and another one in 1179. Complaints about usurers which have been brought to our court should be confined to it and terminated in it. Okay, this is a law against having usurers go to the Pope for justice. I mean, if you're accusing someone of usury, which means charging excessive interest, you go to King William's court, and he forbids you to go to the Pope's court to have that promulgated. Okay. Let's see what other laws of King William. All right, we're doing the yellow ones. Laws of King William. About violence inflicted on prostitutes. It is fitting that all persons subject to the scepter of our rule should be governed by the grace of our majesty. We favor the glory of peace by defending one from another, both men and women, from elders, from minors, and from equals, and by not allowing force to be used at all. Therefore, those miserable women who are marked as prostitutes by their quest for shame should rejoice in gratitude for our favor, that no one may force them to satisfy his will if they are unwilling. Those acting against this general edict after they have confessed and been convicted should be punished by death. The order of consideration should require that if force has been used in places suitable for abode, the cry of the woman oppressed should attract attention as soon as possible after it has been emitted. But it will not appear that force was used if a delay of 8 days has ensued, unless it is proved that she was detained against her will for that time. Okay, this is a law protecting prostitutes from being abused. It's very interesting, isn't it? It's very flowery language. It's much different from the terse laws of King Roger. Yeah.
In a way, this would seem to almost encourage prostitution, not in the sense that go out and do it, but if you're already doing it, we're going to make sure it's all right for you to.
The prostitutes are being protected. Yes, absolutely. That's what the law says. Well, here's another one. He's very flowery. This is comment.
Well, in regions where prostitution's allowed, you have a lot less cases of rape because it's readily accessible, or at least what I've noticed in.
Well, we don't know his reasons. He hasn't told us his reasons for allowing prostitutions, but here he is allowing it. Yeah.
I don't think prostitutes are considered to be of a very high status in society. This indicates that they occupy a lower rung in society.
Absolutely, a low rung in society, but he's protecting them. And he said, when I was reading to you that introduction, he felt bound to protect even the lowest orders of society, and that's what his introduction said. Yeah.
It's not like a lot of women want to be prostitutes. I don't think that would fit.
I think that's absolutely true. Did you have a comment? Yeah.
Yes. Well into the end of the 20th century, there was a claim in different parts of the world, including in the Western world, even in the U.S., over the question about how in the world can you rape a prostitute, something
exactly.
like that. Well, this was to say if you are going to do something like that, it is rape, and you're not going to be allowed to get away with rape just because the person you raped was a prostitute.
Exactly, exactly. This has a very modern tone to it, doesn't it? A very modern feel to it. Well, he's very flowery, and here's another another flowery law. By the tenor of our present Constitution, and he's using the royal we here, by the tenor of our present Constitution, the masters of the Royal Finance Bureau and the master of the Quaestores, that's the Treasury, whose offices we have made distinct from others, should concern themselves with those matters which we have ordered to be attended to by them or by others to whom they particularly assign them. They should be concerned first when treasure and concealed money, whose owners cannot be found by clear proofs, have been found. They should also be concerned about those who owe our court from shipwrecks, when the ownership of some property from the shipwrecks is in question, or there are no surviving legitimate heirs. In addition, if any cleric or layman who possesses hereditary property from the land of our domain dies without heir and has not left a legitimate son or daughter or some ancestor or descendant, or any collateral relative who can legally inherit from a person intestate, and if he has not made a will, the property should be sold publicly at auction with all the solemnity of law, since his inheritance was free and owed no service to the court, and a third of the price for which it was sold should be spent for the poor on behalf of the soul of the deceased. The remainder should be reserved for our court through the office of the aforementioned master of the Finance Bureau and the Quaestor, unless perhaps they should see that it would be profitable for us to keep this hereditary property in the possession of our fisc after the estimated value of 1/3 has been paid on behalf of the soul of the deceased. Okay, very flowery, but they're all to do with financial matters. And notice that he uses the term quaestor or quaestores, which is the old Roman word for a treasurer, a person who deals with the finances. And so it's a very flowery thing, but these are provisions for what to do in cases of collecting money, and if someone dies without heirs, where is the money to go? 1/3 of it is to go to charity, and so that's interesting. Okay, here's one about the office of master chamberlains and bailiffs. We desire justiciars, chamberlains, castellans, and bailiffs to be watchful and faithful to impart counsel and to aid the masters of the Finance Bureau, the quaestores, or other officials when it should be required for the advantage of our court. He's just saying all the officers should help the financial officers. About the officers of bailiffs. Local bailiffs who receive their bailiwick from the master chamberlains and from our court, either in farm or in lease, should know that civil cases, i.e. all real and personal cases which are concerned in the least way with fiefs and feudal properties, belong to their jurisdiction. Okay, the local bailies, who would be, like the sheriff would be in England, in charge of a district. And they are to deal with fiefs and feudal properties. They ought to grant their hearing for the smallest matters, even thefts and others for which the guilty party would not incur the death penalty or mutilation. Okay.
The previous one also answers a question which may have existed as to what extent the different offices were legally subordinate and answerable to higher offices. Now, some may have refused to on the grounds that they were independent, only answerable to the king or whatever, and he is setting out a strict line of subordination and responsibility and authority.
That's an excellent point. And even to the smallest crime, even to the smallest theft, the next law says that, don't overlook even the smallest thing, but you're responsible for all of these. And so he continues with the subject of theft. If a bailiff captures a thief, he should never allow him to escape. But if indeed the thief is a stranger, he should hand him over to the justiciars with all the property as well as the property he has stolen. Moreover, if he is a townsman or a serf, he should be handed over in the same way to our justiciars with what was stolen. Further, the movable property of the thief should be sold by the bailiffs of the same locality for the rights of the fisc. Okay, so regulating theft and what is going to be the punishment and the handling of a thief. How oaths should not be remitted by bailiffs. A frequent report of our fideles to our excellency, and again he's using the royal we, has informed us that some of our bailiffs are extending the office of their bailiwick even to the point that bailiffs are sometimes remitting oaths which are executed in accordance with the nature of the cases on the opinion of the judges as a favor and more often for money received. We consider this evil and forbid it for the future. We establish the penalty of 1 pound of gold against the bailiff who acts contrary. Okay, they're not supposed to overstep their jurisdiction. He's keeping them in their place, and again, as you pointed out, they're establishing the lines of responsibility within the hierarchy. About the lending and commending of money. The prudence of the Royal Majesty demands that we utterly destroy the useless customs of the subjects of our kingdom. Therefore, by this promulgated law, we order that all subject to our jurisdiction in any way who, after they have been lent money, or after money or some other property has been deposited or commended with them, should try to keep it beyond the fixed and legitimate period against the will of those to whom the property belongs, should be fined 1/3 of the property involved in the case if the creditor or depositor or commender is not injured, and the same amount should be taken for the compensation of our bailiwick. We declare to our fideles by the promulgation of the present civil law that it should be known that if the debtor has not turned to cunning arguments and has not desired to defraud his creditor of the credit or debt, we order that the debtor should not be burdened by any other exaction. However, if the debtor should deny the truth and should desire to get around the plaintiff by his cleverness, he should be convicted in all these things for which he condemned his adversary and should pay an entire third to our court. Okay, laws regulating the lending and collecting of money. Yeah, comment.
Is he essentially saying there is a 2/3 penalty for keeping it, 1/3 to go to the person you basically borrowed too long from, and another third to go to the court?
Punishment is very severe.
It's very severe punishment, yeah, and this raises the point of usury. Usury is forbidden by Christian law, and he is allowing it here. He's allowing people to borrow money, and he's... And by Muslim, is it forbidden by Muslim law, usury as well?
It seems like having so many cases covered would increase the income to the kingdom.
It would, yes. Of course, the bailiwick gets 1/3 of it, but so does the king. Yeah.
Well, usury may be illegal, but lending money isn't. It depends upon whether or not you're charging interest. If your neighboring count or your neighboring merchant says, well, ooh, I'm short on funds, and you lend it to him saying, okay, give it back to me a year from now, and he doesn't and refuses, then you can go after him. Now, you're not guilty of usury. You've just lent it to them in good faith that they'll return it.
He's not mentioning interest at all in here. He doesn't mention interest. In Muslim law, no interest can be charged. He doesn't mention interest at all. He's mentioning the penalty for not paying it back, the debtor who doesn't pay it back. If the debtor is honest and doesn't lie or try to trick the creditor, then the debtor is protected, but he's not if he lies or if he tries by cleverness to get out of it.
It is possible that because the interest was not legal in the Muslim system, that people would keep the money beyond the term.
Yeah.
And he is trying to remove that situation.
That may well be it.
Mentioning the old system.
Okay, well, let's see the next one. How clerics should be summoned on behalf of possessions which they do not hold from the church. If any cleric should be summoned on behalf of possession, if any cleric is summoned concerning hereditary property or some holding which he does not hold from the church, but from us or from someone else by inheritance or in some other way, we desire that he should answer for this in the court of the one in whose land he holds the possession or building. He should do what is right, but his person should not be seized and jailed thereafter. Now, this is an interesting law because according to church law, churchmen cannot be tried in civil courts or royal courts, and he is ruling the exact opposite here. He is saying that the cleric must be tried in a royal or a local court, but not a church court. And so this is really going against the laws of the king. About the office of castellans and sergeants. Castellans and sergeants should not receive anything at all from those who have been freed at any time on the same day as they were imprisoned. But if the person who has been imprisoned remains in the same jail for a night, we desire that they should ask for no more than half a tari from the prisoner for his freedom. And a tari was a unit of weight used especially in the kingdom of Sicily for money. Okay. He doesn't say how much money, but it's regulating the fine that a person who's jailed has to pay. Okay, here's one. We desire and order that if any cleric of our entire kingdom should be charged for something done openly for which a person ought to be tried and condemned, he should be judged not by us or by our court, but by the church and in the court of the church, for that which pertains to his person. Also, he should be condemned according to the canons and the ecclesiastical law unless someone has charged him with treason or another major crime of this kind that belongs in our court. But if this occurs, we desire and order that what belongs in our court should be judged in our court. Well, this is another law that subjects clerics in some cases to the court of the king, and of course the popes didn't want that at all. Papal law ruled against that. Okay, here's another one. A justiciar cannot appoint another in his own place, and I think we need to turn the page here. Okay. Okay. The offices which are conferred on a person in a personal way cannot be transferred from the person on whom they have been conferred. We correct the license of the aforesaid illegal presumption whereby the master justiciar and the justiciars in the past appointed vicars in their places. For since an individual case which may be criminal cannot be regularly committed by someone to another, so much the less can all such cases be delegated. But whoever acts contrary to the aforesaid, both the one making the appointment and the one appointed, should know that they will be subjected to a capital sentence. Okay? That justiciars, that's pretty severe. A justiciar cannot appoint another in his own place. He cannot delegate someone else. And the penalty is death in that case. Okay? We consider void and without value those documents involving donations or grants of any kind of contracts in which the name of one of our enemies or a traitor of any kind of invader of our kingdom at all is written. We desire that they should be considered null as the basis for evidence in court or outside of court. We order them to be burned. Okay? All right. This obviously is dealing with the rebels in Italy who are granting lands in their own names against the king, and he's declaring all of their documents and grants null and void. Anybody who is his enemy who makes a grant. In what way champions are required to fight? No champion who has been defeated should be permitted to do battle again on behalf of another, but only for himself. However, he should not be permitted to do so when he has sued someone, but only when someone has sued him. Furthermore, we order that champions should have completely equal clubs without thorns and unsharpened, without horns, and not partially knobbed or hooked. Okay, this obviously is trial by combat. And so if you have a case at court and want to prove your innocence, that you hire a champion to fight in your cause, and God will determine who is the winner and where is justice.
Kind of leap from above?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting justice here.
No throwing rocks.
No throwing rocks. Okay, about those who should enter the clerical order. We correct by a generous interpretation the errors of those who say that certain villeins have been forbidden by a royal constitution to enter the clergy. We order that it should be made known that the only villeins, and villeins are peasants, the only villeins forbidden to become clerics are those who are held to personal service, i.e. with respect to their own person, like the adscripti, the serfs of the glebe, and others of that kind. But if any who owe service by reason of a holding or a benefice desire to become clerics, they may do so even without the permission of their lords after they have resigned what they hold from the lords into their hands. This reverses the law that we saw earlier that forbade adscripti or people who were the vassals of a lord from becoming clerics. Now he's permitting it. Okay, he's reversing.
But only so long as they resign first.
But they have to resign first, yeah. Okay, so in this case, Erlewalt would be able to do that. He would have followed this law.
He needs more clerks now.
Maybe he needs more clerks. Yeah, the government is becoming more complex. He needs more bureaucrats. All right, how a dowry should be established in fiefs and castles. If any baron or knight marries a wife and he has 3 fiefs, he may legally establish one of the 3 fiefs as a dowry for his wife. But if he has fewer, we permit him to establish a dowry in money, depending on the nature and the number of the fiefs. However, if he has more than 3, he may legally establish a dowry out of the part that has been determined to be greater. Moreover, a count or baron who holds a castra, that would be castle, can establish a dowry from these castra, but he cannot establish the castrum from which the barony or county takes its name as a dowry. Okay, this is very generous, a very generous and large dowry that's permitted of a lord to give to his wife. That's quite extraordinary.
Is this required or just permitted?
Permitted. It's permitted. He may legally establish one of the 3 fiefs as a dowry. But obviously, if there's a very desirable woman who is an heiress or very wealthy and a lot of men want to marry her, then they can bid on her and, give her better dowry. So they're permitted to do that. How dowry should be established. After the death of her husband, a woman who has a dower in land is required to promise fealty for the dower to the heir or to the lord of the barony for his life, his members, and the capture of his body. She should also promise that she will not seek by guile or ingenuity the means whereby the aforesaid dower may be withdrawn from the barony or county, always with the reservation of the mandate of the higher lord. But a woman is not required to promise fealty to the sons of a common marriage. At the request of the lord, a woman who holds a dower is required to be present at service of the court. If she should not be present, she should be deceased. Okay, she has to attend the court just like a man who holds a fief. If she should not be present, she should be deceased after 3 warnings by the lord. And also, if unjust burdens are inflicted on the men by the dowers, the woman is required to correct them by the lord of the barony or the fief. The men ought to promise fealty to the lady of the dower, always with the reservation of the right of the lord, count, or baron. They are also required to promise fealty to the count or baron, with the reservation of the right of the aforesaid lady of the dower. This is, as you were mentioning, where you had a woman, Sigelgaita, who is styling herself as dukes. A woman is given as many rights as a man here, as a lord. She is a lord in right of the property she owns and the fealty she does to her lord. And so she's given equal rights to men. Isn't that interesting? And she may accept fealty from others, from the men under her jurisdiction. Isn't that interesting? Okay, about brothers who obligate part of the fief for the dowries of sisters. We permit brothers to obligate part of a fief for the dowries of their sisters if they do not have movable property or heritable tenancies. Also, if they have 3 or more fiefs, they can grant one of them as a dowry for their sister. However, in all the aforesaid matters, if a fief is alienated, obligated, or established as a dowry, the marriage itself should be contracted by our special license. Otherwise, all agreements have no force. Well, this is quite interesting, that we permit brothers to obligate a part of the fief to provide for their sisters if they do not have movable property or heritable tenancies. This suggests that many sisters inherit property along with brothers. And if they don't, the brothers can provide for their sisters. But then the king has the right to control such agreements because obviously they're fiefs held by the king. So feudalism is becoming very established, and he's trying to regulate it, to try to take care of the irregularities. Do we have any more laws by King Williams? Pardon?
I see 2 at least. The yellow ones are here.
Yeah, 2. The yellow ones are there are more than 2. Okay. The complaints of the fideles of our kingdom come to us often because prelates of churches, counts, barons, and knights exact and extort aids from their men for their needs by their own arbitrary decision. Therefore, since we desire to provide mercifully against the harsh oppression of our subjects, we order that lords may seek an aid only in the cases given below, for the redemption of the Lord if he was captured by our enemies while in our service, for making his son a knight, for buying land, but only once when he buys it for our service and for our army, and a moderate amount for our support when it happens that we are guests in their lands or should receive support from them. In all the aforesaid cases, however, Lord should exact and demand the aid from them in moderation. All right, this is aids, are payments that are due from vassals to lords, and he's regulating them, and he's passing laws to see when they should be granted. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, and there are our knights fighting again. All right. All right. About the administration of ecclesiastical property after the death of prelates. All right. No. Oh, this is a long one. All right. It has come to our attention that bailiffs who were formerly appointed for churches lacking pastors in order to guard and keep secure the property of the churches for the period provided for this by the pastors did not perform this service as faithfully and zealously as when it was enjoined by our court, but treated and guarded the property of these churches badly. But since we have in our hand and under our protection all the churches of our kingdom, and especially those that lack pastors, and since we are unwilling for the property of these churches to be diminished or defrauded in any way, we order and decree that whenever in the future any archbishop or bishop dies, the property of his church should be committed to the custody and care of 3 of the better, more faithful, and also wiser persons of that church, to be guarded and preserved for the work of the church, as it would be by the pastor in the same church. Only the needs of those living there should be preserved in a reasonable and sufficient manner from the rents and incomes of that church for the use of those who serve it. From these rents and incomes, much may be devoted reasonably and well to that church. The rest should be preserved safe and intact by those custodians for the work of the church until a pastor is appointed there. But when a pastor has been appointed by the church, they should hand over the remainder of the property and the revenues of that church to the pastor and should then render an account to them. Okay, he's the head of the church. He's regulating the vacancies when a bishop or an archbishop dies. He's making sure that there is a safe and secure transfer of the funds of that church and that they're protected. Okay. About fugitive male and female slaves. Well, first of all, there are slaves in that society. This law tells us. We order generally that no male or female slave should be seized by anyone unless they restore them to their Lord as quickly as possible. If they do not know the Lord, they should hand them over to the bailiffs of our court. The bailiffs should send them to our great court. They should know that whoever dares to seize any slave or handmaiden in any way from now on, or to detain them in any way whatever, will with all his goods be subject to the penalty of the court. Unless bailiffs send them to our great court, they will undergo the same penalty. Okay, so let's see if we can quickly get through. About money found on the property of another. If anyone finds money, silver, or money, gold or silver, precious stones, or something else that does not belong to him, save for animals whose disposition was established earlier, the finder should immediately show it to our justiciars or to the local bailiffs, and without delay he should bring it and hand it over to our great court. Otherwise he will be held by the penalty for theft. And let's kind of leave that one there, obviously. About thefts and robberies, it has come to the attention of our Highness that many thefts and robberies of animals were committed until the present in Apulia, and these remain concealed and also unpunished for some vain and foolish reason. For when animals were found with some persons who pretended that they found them wandering loose or that they had taken them from the hands of thieves, they plotted madly in secret and extorted the price of redemption for the animals from their owners, and this was evil. And they evaded by fraud the penalty and the stain while they kept the profit for theft. Okay, but since we ought to embrace justice, favor peace, and abolish what is contrary to peace, it has pleased our Majesty to suppress their fraudulent wickedness by our Constitution and by an abundance of justice, by exposing concealed thefts of this kind in order to destroy them for the benefit of perpetual security. Okay, all this flowery language is what he's punishing is theft of animals. Our Majesty, yes, a very royal decree and very flowery indeed. Okay, and so he continues in the same way. Okay, so anyway, we've gotten through most of his laws. He's regulating the kingdom, and he has become much more flowery and much more royal and much more seniorial and sort of godlike in the way he's administering these laws. Okay, we'll continue next time, and we'll look at some of the great buildings that were built at this time, and look at the greatness of the legacy of the Normans in Italy. So, see you next week.